When my girlfriend started earning more money than me at work, everything changed. She became materialistic and eventually lost everything she had built for so long. Hey everyone, my name is Blake, and this whole mess started about 4 years ago when I thought I'd met the woman of my dreams. I was at some business networking event in downtown Miami, one of those corporate mixer things where everyone's trying to make connections and hand out business cards. That's where I first laid eyes on Jessica, and I honestly thought I'd hit the absolute jackpot with her. Jessica was everything I was looking for in a partner. She was smart, incredibly driven, and worked as a marketing coordinator making decent money. She had this confidence about her that was magnetic. Like she knew exactly where her life was headed and wasn't going to let anyone or anything stop her from getting there. She had this whole life plan mapped out, complete with career goals and timelines, and I found that level of ambition incredibly attractive. Meanwhile, I was pulling in around $145,000 a year as a technical consultant, and I remember thinking we were going to be this perfect power couple, you know? Two successful professionals building something amazing together. The topic of a prenuptial agreement never even came up as a serious discussion between us. I mean, we joked about it once or twice in passing, but it was always in a lighthearted way that neither of us took seriously. The reality was that we were making roughly the same amount of money at the time, and we'd already established this pattern of splitting everything equally in our relationship. The whole concept of a prenup just felt wrong to both of us, like it would contradict everything we'd built together. The men who do stick around seem to see dollar signs when they look at me instead of seeing an actual person with feelings and emotions. They're either gold diggers themselves who think they can take advantage of my financial success, or they're guys who get some kind of twisted satisfaction from dating the woman who became infamous for calling her husband a parasite. Neither type makes for a healthy relationship foundation. I'm making great money at my job, living in a nice downtown apartment that I can afford all by myself, and advancing in my career faster than I ever imagined possible when I first started working in marketing. But despite all this professional success, I'm completely alone in my personal life. I haven't had a serious relationship since Blake, and I can't even manage to get past a third date with anyone decent or emotionally available. The irony isn't lost on me that I destroyed my marriage trying to protect assets that I now get to enjoy all by myself in my empty apartment. All those fears I had about losing half my wealth in a divorce, and I ended up losing something far more valuable than money, a partner who actually loved and supported me unconditionally. I threw away a loving relationship with someone who celebrated my success and wanted to build a life together. Sometimes I find myself wondering what would have happened if I had just kept those toxic thoughts to myself and worked through them privately. Maybe I could have talked to a therapist instead of venting to my mother about my marriage. Maybe I could have found a way to address my fears without destroying the trust that Blake and I had built over 4 years together. But it's way too late for what-if scenarios now. I made my choice when I decided that protecting my money was more important than protecting my marriage. I let fear and resentment poison something beautiful and rare. And now I have to live with the consequences of that decision every single day. Blake moved on pretty quickly after our divorce was finalized, which honestly shouldn't have surprised me, but still hurt more than I expected it to. I heard through mutual friends that he started dating someone new within about 6 months of our divorce being final. She's apparently some elementary school teacher he met at a coffee shop near his office. From what I've heard, she thinks his whole story about standing up for his principles and walking away from money is incredibly romantic. She sees him as this principled man who chose dignity over financial gain. Blake and his new girlfriend got engaged last year, and I found out about it through a small announcement that appeared in the local paper. Nothing dramatic or elaborate, just a simple engagement photo of the two of them looking genuinely happy together. They had the kind of authentic happiness and contentment that I thought Blake and I had once shared, back when I still believed our marriage was built on solid ground. I still live here in Miami, still working at the same marketing firm where I've been climbing the corporate ladder steadily. I'm still making excellent money and achieving all the professional goals I set for myself years ago. But every success feels completely hollow now because there's nobody meaningful in my life to share it with. Nobody cares about my latest promotion, or my quarterly bonus, or the new apartment I can afford all by myself with my impressive salary. The worst part about my current situation is knowing with absolute certainty that I did this to myself. Blake didn't cheat on me, didn't lie to me, didn't abuse me or treat me badly in any way. He supported my career advancement, celebrated every one of my successes, and treated me like an equal partner in absolutely everything we did together. and I threw it all away because I was scared of some hypothetical future scenario that never even happened. I turned my marriage into a cold business transaction in my head, constantly calculating financial risks and potential losses instead of focusing on the love and partnership we were building together. When Blake discovered what I was really thinking about our relationship, he walked away completely because he had married me for love, not for money. That's something I apparently forgot along the way as my salary increased, and my fears took over my rational thinking. Jessica actually said something to me once that really stuck with me at the time. She told me that prenups were for people who didn't really trust each other, and I remember thinking that made perfect sense. Her logic was simple. Why would you marry someone if you're already planning for the possibility of divorce? That perspective resonated with me completely because we were supposed to be building something together as a unified team. The idea of legally protecting ourselves from each other seemed to go against the very foundation of what we were creating. Now I'm 33 years old, professionally successful, and completely financially independent. I have everything I thought I wanted when I was worried about protecting my assets from my husband. But I'm also completely alone, with a reputation that follows me everywhere I go online and in person. I've become a cautionary tale about what happens when you let greed and fear destroy something beautiful and rare. Sometimes when I'm driving around Miami, I find myself taking routes that go past the house where Blake and I used to live together. Blake still lives there with his new fiancée, and I can see them through the windows sometimes when I drive by slowly. I watch them cooking dinner together, sitting on the couch watching television, just living the normal, happy life that I could have had if I hadn't been so incredibly stupid and selfish. But this is my life now. The life I actively chose when I decided that protecting my money was more important than protecting my marriage and the love Blake and I shared. I have all the financial security I was so worried about losing, and absolutely nothing else that matters. I destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me because I was afraid of losing money. And now I have all the money and none of the happiness. Looking back, I realized that Blake was right to leave me. I had become someone who saw her own husband as a financial threat rather than a life partner. I had poisoned our relationship with suspicion and resentment while he was trying to build something beautiful with me. He deserved better than what I had become, and now he has it with someone who appreciates him for who he is rather than calculating what he might cost her. Our wedding turned out absolutely perfect. Nothing too elaborate or expensive, but exactly what we both wanted. We had a small, intimate ceremony with just our close family and friends in attendance. I remember having this amazing feeling during the whole event, like we were officially becoming this unstoppable team that could take on anything life threw at us. There's this moment I'll never forget when we were dancing together at the reception, both of us laughing about how we'd managed to throw such a great celebration without going broke in the process. That was so perfectly us, practical and financially responsible, but genuinely happy and in love. About 8 months after the wedding, Jessica received what can only be described as an incredible career opportunity. Some major corporate marketing firm had offered her a position that represented a huge step up from what she'd been doing before. When she called me at work to tell me she'd gotten the job, I could literally hear her vibrating with excitement through the phone. The salary they were offering represented a massive jump from what she'd been making previously, and I was genuinely thrilled for her because I knew how hard she'd worked for this kind of break. Jessica had truly worked her ass off for years to get this type of opportunity. I'd watched her put in countless late nights at the office, take on weekend projects that ate into our personal time, and constantly push herself to excel in everything she did. I felt incredibly proud to be married to someone that successful and driven. We celebrated that night with champagne and everything, went to this nice Italian restaurant we both loved, and made it a proper celebration. She kept thanking me throughout dinner for being so supportive of her career, which honestly felt a little weird to me because I couldn't imagine not being supportive of my wife's success. Why wouldn't I want the person I love to achieve everything she's worked so hard for? The financial dynamic between us didn't really change much at first, even with Jessica's significant salary increase. We maintained our established pattern of splitting everything 50-50 like we always had throughout our entire relationship. What this meant in practical terms was that she now had considerably more money left over at the end of each month than I did. But I didn't see that as a problem. That's just how partnerships work, right? Sometimes one person is in a position to contribute more than the other, and sometimes the roles are reversed. I figured it all balances out in the end when you're building a life together as a team. Looking back on that period now, I never felt like Jessica was flaunting her higher salary or using it to make me feel inferior in any way. She never made comments that made me feel small or inadequate about earning less than her. And she certainly never suggested that her increased income should change the fundamental dynamics of our relationship. I wonder now if I was just completely oblivious to subtle signs that something was shifting in how she viewed our marriage. Maybe there were little comments here and there that I missed, or changes in her behavior that I should have picked up on. But honestly, at the time, things seemed absolutely great between us. We were actively discussing our future plans as a couple, talking about eventually buying our own place when we were ready to move out of my parents' house. We'd even started having those conversations about maybe starting a family in a few years, all the normal married couple discussions that you're supposed to have when you're planning a life together. I felt completely secure in our relationship and confident that we'd built something solid that could weather any challenges that came our way. There was no reason for me to think anything was wrong. The weekend that everything fell apart started out completely normal, just like any other weekend we'd spent together. Jessica's mother was coming to visit us for the first time since our wedding, which was actually kind of a big deal because she lived all the way across the country and didn't travel very often due to some ongoing health issues she'd been dealing with. Jessica had been looking forward to this visit for weeks, excited about the opportunity to show her mom around Miami and maybe take her to some of the local spots we'd discovered together during our time living there. I remember offering to make myself scarce during parts of the visit if Jessica and her mom wanted some quality girl time together, but Jessica insisted that she wanted all three of us to hang out together. She thought it would be nice for her mother to see firsthand how well we were doing as a married couple, and I was looking forward to spending time with my mother-in-law and maybe getting to know her better than I had during our brief interactions at the wedding. What really drew me to Jessica initially was that unwavering confidence she carried herself with. She moved through that networking event like she owned the place, engaging in conversations with ease and making connections that seemed effortless. There was something about the way she talked about her future that made you believe she was going to achieve everything she set out to do. She wasn't just dreaming. She was planning, strategizing, and executing. I'd never met anyone quite like her before. That Saturday morning, I decided to run some errands while Jessica and her mom had a chance to catch up after not seeing each other for so long. Lewis was advertising a sale on some power tools I'd been wanting to add to my collection, so I figured I'd head over there and check out what they had available. My plan was to grab lunch somewhere afterward and give the two of them a few hours to themselves to reconnect. It seemed like the considerate husband thing to do, just normal, thoughtful behavior that would give them space for some quality mother-daughter time. Before I left, I kissed Jessica goodbye and said a quick hello to her mom, thinking I'd return home later to find them going through old photo albums, or maybe looking at our wedding pictures on Jessica's laptop. You know, the typical stuff that mothers and daughters do when they get together after a long separation. I had no reason to expect anything unusual would happen while I was out. Here's the thing about trust in a marriage. You operate under this fundamental assumption that the person you married, the person you share a bed with every single night, sees you the same way you see them. I saw Jessica as my partner, my teammate, the person I was building a life with through thick and thin. I assumed she saw me in exactly the same way, as her equal partner who was committed to our shared future. We'd been together for years. We'd made vows to each other, and we'd built what I thought was a solid foundation of mutual respect and love. But assumptions, even the ones that feel completely safe and reasonable based on years of shared experience, can destroy everything when they turn out to be wrong. I had absolutely no idea that within just a few hours of leaving that house, everything I believed about my marriage, everything I thought I knew about the woman I'd chosen to spend my life with, would be completely shattered. I was just a guy running errands on a Saturday morning, thinking about power tools, and maybe grilling some burgers for lunch. This is where the story gets really messed up, because now I need to explain what was actually going through Jessica's head during this time. The promotion had changed everything for her, even though she tried to pretend it hadn't at first. Those first few weeks after landing that corporate marketing job, she was riding this incredible high from finally making the kind of money she'd always dreamed about and being recognized for all those late nights and weekend work sessions she'd put in over the years. Blake had been absolutely amazing about her promotion from the very beginning. He was constantly telling people how proud he was of his successful wife, bragging about her accomplishments to anyone who would listen. But despite his unwavering support, there was this persistent voice in the back of Jessica's head that just wouldn't shut up. It started small, just these little nagging thoughts that would creep in at random moments throughout her day, but they gradually grew stronger and more intrusive as time went on. For example, when they would split a dinner bill at a restaurant, she'd find herself realizing that her half of the check now represented a much smaller percentage of her total income than his half did of his income. Or when they were discussing vacation plans for a trip to the Bahamas, she'd catch herself thinking about how much easier it would be to book that nicer resort with the ocean view if she didn't have to worry about whether it fit within Blake's more limited budget. These weren't fair thoughts, and she knew that intellectually. But they were there anyway, growing stronger and more persistent with each passing day. The real problem started when Jessica began doing detailed mathematical calculations on absolutely everything in their shared financial life. And I mean everything, down to the last penny. She would analyze their joint savings account contributions, the retirement fund deposits they were making each month, and even the equity that was building up in Blake's parents' house, despite the fact that they weren't paying any rent. Every single dollar that went into their shared financial life was now weighted differently in her mind because she was contributing a larger percentage to the overall pot. Even though they were still technically splitting all expenses 50-50, this new perspective made her feel like she was inadvertently subsidizing their entire lifestyle in a way that Blake didn't fully understand or appreciate. The feeling started eating at her more and more each day, creating this underlying resentment that she struggled to push away. She knew these thoughts were probably unfair, but she couldn't seem to stop herself from having them. But here's what really started consuming her thoughts and keeping her awake at night. They were married now, which meant that everything she earned from this point forward was legally considered half his under the law. Every bonus she received, every raise she negotiated, every smart investment decision she made. All of it was building wealth that Blake would have a legal claim to if their marriage ever went south. And they didn't have a prenuptial agreement to protect any of her individual contributions or acknowledge the reality of their different earning potential. There wasn't a single legal document that recognized the fact that she was now the primary income earner in their household. The crazy thing is, we clicked immediately when it came to discussing money and finances. Most people dance around financial topics when they're first dating, treating it like some taboo subject that might scare off a potential partner. Not Jessica, though. She was completely straight up about everything from day one, which I found refreshing and mature. She would split every restaurant bill down to the exact penny, every concert ticket we bought, every weekend trip we took down to the Florida Keys. Everything was split right down the middle, no exceptions. Jessica knew exactly how all of this sounded, and she really did understand how terrible these thoughts were. It wasn't like she didn't trust her own husband or anything quite that straightforward. But it wasn't entirely about trust either. Not exactly. It was about this growing awareness that she had put herself in an incredibly vulnerable financial position without even realizing it was happening. All those years of being completely independent, of building her own financial security brick by brick, and now she was legally tied to someone who could potentially walk away with half of everything she'd worked so hard to achieve. What made the situation even more frustrating for her was how completely comfortable Blake seemed with their entire arrangement. He never once suggested that maybe he should pick up a bigger share of their monthly expenses now that she was earning significantly more than him. He never showed any signs of feeling awkward or uncomfortable about her out-earning him. And more troubling to her, he showed no apparent motivation to push harder in his own career to close the growing gap between their salaries. Don't get her wrong. Blake worked hard at his job and was genuinely good at what he did as a technical consultant. But there was this sense of contentment about his current salary level that started to really bug her. She found herself wondering if this was really his ceiling professionally, or if he was just going to coast along while she continued climbing the corporate ladder and increasing her earning potential year after year. Jessica started having these horrible, intrusive thoughts during their normal daily routine that made her feel guilty, even as she was having them. They'd be making coffee together in the morning, with Blake chatting casually about his day ahead, and she'd be calculating in her head exactly how much more money she would earn during that 8-hour period than he would. Or they'd be relaxing together, watching Netflix at night, and she'd find herself thinking about how the subscription they were splitting 50-50 was basically pocket change for her now, but still represented a line item that Blake had to actively consider when managing his monthly budget. These realizations made her feel simultaneously guilty and resentful, which is a really toxic emotional combination to be carrying around in a marriage. The house situation made everything feel even worse and more complicated. Here they were living completely rent-free in his family's property, building up savings that she was contributing more to every single month due to her higher income. But if they ever got divorced, wouldn't Blake have some legitimate legal claim to that house too? After all, They were married and living there together as a couple. What if his parents decided to officially gift the property to him outright? What if they decided to put money into major renovations or improvements? Every scenario she played out in her head seemed to end with her losing money she had personally earned to someone who hadn't actually earned it himself. And then there was the alimony question, which honestly kept Jessica awake at night sometimes, staring at the ceiling while Blake slept peacefully beside her. If they got divorced, there was a very real possibility that she would have to pay him spousal support based on their income disparity. Can you imagine that scenario? Here she was, working her ass off to build a successful career and earning more than her husband, and then potentially having to cut him a monthly check after he walked away from their marriage. The very thought absolutely terrified her. The legal system that was originally designed to protect lower-earning spouses, typically women, could end up punishing her for being successful and ambitious. That realization felt deeply unfair and kept her up worrying about worst-case scenarios that seemed increasingly possible the more she thought about them. Jessica tried desperately to push these thoughts away. She really did. She would constantly remind herself that Blake was fundamentally a good husband who loved her, and that money wasn't supposed to be everything in a marriage. But once those fears and resentments got firmly planted in her head, they just kept growing stronger and more intrusive. Every financial decision they made together as a couple felt like she was taking on disproportionately more risk than he was. Every month that passed without addressing the growing income disparity between them felt like she was getting deeper and deeper into a hole she wouldn't be able to climb out of. Her mother's visit was supposed to be a fun, relaxing time, just a chance for her mom to see firsthand how well they were doing as a married couple, and maybe do some shopping together at the Miami outlets or visit some of the local attractions. But Jessica had been feeling so anxious and overwhelmed about all of these financial concerns that she knew she desperately needed to talk to someone about what she was going through. Her mother had always been incredibly practical when it came to money matters, probably because she had watched Jessica's father struggle financially after their own divorce years earlier. Jessica thought that maybe her mom would be able to help put things in perspective for her, or at least give her some solid advice on how to handle this increasingly difficult situation with Blake. I have to say, I genuinely respected that approach from her. There were no games, no subtle expectations that I should automatically pay for everything just because I was the guy in the relationship. We were equals in this partnership, and that felt absolutely right to me. It seemed like we were building something based on mutual respect and shared responsibility rather than outdated gender roles or financial dependencies. That Saturday morning, after Blake left to run his errands at Lou's, Jessica just let everything pour out of her. All the fears she'd been carrying around for months, all the resentment she'd been trying so hard to suppress, all the regret she felt about not protecting herself legally before they got married. She told her mother about lying awake at night calculating various divorce scenarios, about feeling trapped by her own professional success, and about wondering if she'd made a huge mistake by not insisting on a prenuptial agreement before their wedding ceremony. It felt incredibly good to finally say all of this out loud, to admit to someone that she was scared and angry and confused about her own marriage. For the first time in months, she felt like maybe she wasn't completely crazy for having these concerns and fears. Her mother was nodding along understandingly, seeming to grasp exactly what Jessica meant without judging her for having these thoughts. Jessica had absolutely no idea that her husband was about to walk through that front door and hear every single word she was saying to her mother. Meanwhile, the tool sale at Lowe's had turned out to be pretty disappointing. It was just the usual overpriced merchandise with maybe a 10% discount slapped on nothing that justified making a special trip or spending money I didn't really need to spend. I figured I'd rather spend the rest of the afternoon with Jessica and her mom than wander around looking at socket wrenches and drill bits that I didn't actually need. Plus, I thought maybe I could fire up the grill and make some burgers for lunch, turn it into a nice family day where we could all hang out together. I pulled into the driveway around noon and grabbed my phone to check if we had enough ground beef in the freezer for 3 people. That's when I first heard Jessica's voice coming through the kitchen window. Our house has these old single-pane windows that don't do much to block sound, especially when someone's talking louder than usual. She was definitely speaking louder than normal, probably because she was upset or agitated about something she was discussing with her mother. I was just walking toward the front door like I always did when coming home, not trying to eavesdrop or spy on anyone. But then I distinctly heard my name mentioned, and definitely not in a good way. Jessica was saying something about how I was getting too comfortable living off her higher salary, and how she should have demanded a prenuptial agreement before we got married. I literally stopped dead in my tracks on the walkway, trying to process what I was hearing. What the hell was she talking about? Living off her salary? We split absolutely everything 50 down to the last dollar. We always had since the day we moved in together. This wasn't some arrangement where I was financially dependent on her or taking advantage of her success in any way. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, just trying to wrap my head around what I was hearing come out of my wife's mouth. That's when it occurred to me that I should probably record this conversation, not because I was planning anything malicious or vindictive, but because what she was saying was so completely different from everything I thought we both believed about our marriage that I knew she would probably deny saying it later. Jessica was really good at that particular skill, reframing conversations after the fact when she realized she'd said something she probably shouldn't have said. She had a talent for making you question your own memory of events, so I pulled out my phone and started recording what I was hearing. The stuff I captured over the next few minutes basically destroyed everything I thought I knew about the woman I'd married. She told her mother that she felt trapped by her own success within our marriage, and that every dollar she earned was potentially wealth that could become mine if we ever got divorced. She said she was genuinely scared about the possibility of having to pay me alimony, like I was some kind of deadbeat who was planning to take her money and run. There were no games with Jessica, no subtle expectations that I should automatically pay for everything just because I happened to be the man in the relationship. We approached everything as equals in this partnership, and that dynamic felt absolutely right to me. It seemed like we were building something solid based on mutual respect and shared responsibility rather than falling into those outdated gender roles or creating any kind of financial dependency between us. Jessica kept talking about how she should have protected herself legally before marrying me, like I was some kind of financial predator she needed to defend against. But here's the part that really cut deep and hit me where it hurt the most. She said I was comfortable with her earning more than me, and she said it like that was somehow a bad thing. Like being supportive of my wife's career success and celebrating her achievements made me some kind of gold digger or opportunist. She actually used those exact words during her conversation with her mother. She told her mom that she was worried I might be in the marriage primarily for the money, that she'd been too trusting when we got married. This was coming from the woman I'd been with for 4 years, someone I'd supported through every late night at the office, every stressful project deadline, every career milestone. I was the guy who'd been earning more than her until very recently, and I was the one who'd been cheering her on and celebrating every step of her professional journey. I missed the very beginning of their conversation since I'd just arrived home. So I don't know exactly how this topic came up, or what prompted her to start venting about our marriage. But I captured enough of their discussion to understand that this wasn't just casual worry or normal newlywed anxiety or anything like that. This was deep, festering resentment that had apparently been building inside her for months, maybe even longer than that. Jessica had been looking at our marriage like it was some kind of business transaction where she was getting financially screwed over, and I had been completely oblivious to her true feelings this entire time. While I thought we were this happy, successful couple building a life together, she was apparently calculating divorce scenarios and regretting our decision not to get a prenup. Standing outside my own house, listening to my wife basically describe me as a parasite who was taking advantage of her success, was probably one of the most devastating moments of my entire life. We'd been together for 4 years total, married for over a year, and apparently she'd been harboring these thoughts and feelings while I was walking around thinking everything was perfect between us. How do you come back from finding out that your life partner sees you as a financial threat instead of a teammate? How do you continue being married to someone who's been looking at you with suspicion and resentment while you're trying to build a future together? How do you trust someone who's been calculating how much you might cost her in a hypothetical divorce? I took a few deep breaths, stopped the recording on my phone, and walked through the front door like nothing unusual had happened. I found Jessica and her mother in the kitchen, with Jessica still looking agitated from whatever she'd been venting about, and her mom nodding along sympathetically like they'd just been discussing something as mundane as the weather forecast. I looked directly at Jessica and asked as calmly as I could manage under the circumstances, "Do you think your husband is a gold digger?" The look on Jessica's face when I asked that question was absolutely priceless. There was this instant flash of pure panic that crossed her features, followed immediately by this fake confusion that she tried to put on like she had absolutely no idea what I could possibly be talking about. She immediately went into full damage control mode, asking me where that question had come from out of nowhere, and insisting that she'd never said anything even remotely like that about me. She was basically trying to gaslight me in real time, right there in our kitchen. Her mother jumped into the conversation as well, saying that I must have misunderstood something they were discussing, and that Jessica was just expressing normal financial concerns that any smart, successful woman would have in today's world. Normal financial concerns about her own husband, apparently. The two of them were tag-teaming me, trying to make me feel like I was being paranoid or unreasonable for even bringing up the topic. About 2 years into our relationship, my parents made the decision to retire and move out to Arizona to embrace the whole desert retirement lifestyle. They were ready for that next chapter of their lives, and they essentially handed me the keys to their house with a simple, "Make yourself at home." It was a decent 3-bedroom place located in a really good Miami neighborhood. Nothing too fancy or extravagant, but it was definitely way better than anything either Jessica or I could have afforded on our own at that point in our careers. I let them dig themselves deeper into their lies for a few minutes, just watching Jessica work through her usual playbook of denial and deflection that I'd seen her use in other situations when she was caught saying something she shouldn't have. She kept insisting that I had somehow taken something completely out of context, that she'd never questioned my motives for marrying her, and that I was being paranoid and controlling for even asking such a question. This was classic Jessica behavior, turning the table so that somehow I became the problem for bringing up what she'd actually said. Her mother started backing her up enthusiastically, going on and on about how marriage is naturally complicated and that Jessica had every right to think about financial planning and protecting herself. When her mom started lecturing me about Jessica's right to protect herself financially from her own husband, I'd had enough of this complete bullshit. This was my house, my family's house, and I wasn't going to stand there and be tag-teamed by my wife and mother-in-law about what a potential financial threat I apparently was to their precious money. I told her mother, very politely but firmly, that she needed to leave. Not because I was trying to be controlling or aggressive, but because this was a conversation that needed to happen between me and my wife, and having her there was just making Jessica feel like she had backup for her lies and manipulation. Jessica absolutely lost her mind when I asked her mother to leave the house. She started yelling about how I couldn't just kick her mother out, demanding to know how I could be so disrespectful to a guest in our home. She put on the whole dramatic routine that she always does when she's been cornered and caught in something she can't talk her way out of. But here's the interesting thing. Once her mother actually left, and it was just the two of us alone in that kitchen, Jessica's whole approach and demeanor changed completely. She went from righteous indignation and anger to this desperate, pleading kind of tone. She started trying to convince me that her fears and concerns didn't actually mean anything significant, that she was just stressed about money in general and didn't really think I was using her for financial gain. She kept saying over and over that she loved me and trusted me completely, and that I was taking everything the wrong way. Jessica insisted that couples talk through their worries and concerns all the time, and that it doesn't mean they don't believe in their marriage or their partner. She was trying to frame this whole situation like it was just normal relationship maintenance. Like every wife sits around calculating divorce scenarios and discussing how her husband might be financially exploiting her. The fundamental problem was that I'd heard what I'd heard, and it wasn't taken out of context or misunderstood in any way. These were her actual words about our actual marriage, words that revealed her true feelings about me and our relationship. She'd been harboring this deep resentment and suspicion for months, possibly even longer than that. And I'd been walking around completely oblivious, thinking we were this happy, successful couple building something meaningful together. How do you stay married to someone who sees you as a financial liability rather than a life partner? How do you share a bed every night with someone who's been calculating how much you might cost her in a potential divorce? How do you trust someone who's been looking at you like you're some kind of con artist while you're trying to plan a future together? I looked at Jessica, really looked at her, and realized with perfect clarity that I didn't actually know this woman at all. The person I thought I had married simply didn't exist. This person standing in front of me, desperately trying to explain away her true feelings, had been playing some kind of long-term game that I didn't even know was happening. She'd been evaluating our marriage like a business transaction, while I was treating it like a loving partnership. I told Jessica that she needed to pack some things and leave the house. This was my family's property, and I wasn't going to continue living with someone who thought I was trying to steal from her. As far as I was concerned, our marriage was over, and we both knew it. There was no coming back from this level of deception and betrayal. Jessica moved in with me about 7 months after we started dating, and we maintained that same 50-50 split philosophy with absolutely everything. Mortgage payments, electric bills, groceries, streaming service subscriptions. Every single expense was divided right down the middle without exception. What made this arrangement even more meaningful to me was that Jessica actually insisted on maintaining this system. She told me explicitly that she didn't want to be financially dependent on anyone, and I found that attitude genuinely admirable. Here was a woman who valued her independence and wanted to contribute equally to our shared life. When Blake told me to pack my things and leave, I completely panicked. This wasn't how this conversation was supposed to go at all. I'd just been venting to my mother about some fears that had been building up inside me, working through some complicated emotions privately with someone I trusted. Suddenly, my husband was acting like I'd committed some kind of unforgivable betrayal against our marriage. I spent the next 3 hours basically begging Blake to listen to reason, trying desperately to explain that having worries and concerns didn't mean I didn't love him or trust him. I kept telling him that successful women are supposed to think about protecting their financial assets, and that I was just being responsible about planning for our future together. I thought if I could just make him understand my perspective, we could work through this like mature adults. But Blake was completely done with me, totally shut down in that way he gets when he's made up his mind about something and refuses to budge. He kept saying that he'd heard what he'd heard, and that there was no coming back from what I'd revealed about my true feelings. No amount of explanation or apologizing was going to fix the damage that had been done to our relationship. I tried absolutely everything I could think of to salvage our marriage. I was crying, apologizing profusely, explaining that I was just scared and working through some difficult emotions. I reminded him of all the good times we'd had together over the past 4 years, all the plans we'd made for our future, all the dreams we'd shared about buying our own place and maybe starting a family someday. Nothing I said made any difference at all. Blake just kept methodically packing my belongings into suitcases, treating me like I was some stranger he was evicting from his property rather than his wife of over a year. He wasn't the person he'd promised to love through everything, through good times and bad, through all the challenges that marriage inevitably brings. It was like watching a completely different person who had no emotional connection to me whatsoever. The worst part of the entire experience was how calm Blake stayed throughout this whole devastating conversation. There was no yelling, no dramatic arguments, no emotional outbursts that I could work with or respond to. Just this cold, clinical efficiency that made it absolutely clear he'd already moved on mentally from our marriage. It was like he'd flipped some internal switch and I was completely dead to him as a person. When I asked him where I was supposed to go, since this had all happened so suddenly and I hadn't had time to make any arrangements, he said he didn't care where I went. That's when I knew with absolute certainty that he was serious about ending our marriage. This wasn't just some dramatic gesture to scare me into apologizing or changing my behavior. He genuinely wanted me out of his life permanently. I ended up staying at my friend Linda's place that first night, crying into her couch cushions and trying to figure out how my marriage had completely imploded in the span of just a few hours. Linda kept telling me that Blake was massively overreacting to what was essentially normal relationship anxiety, and that couples work through much worse problems than this all the time. She was convinced that he'd probably call by morning, ready to have a rational conversation about what had happened. But Monday came and went with absolutely nothing from Blake. Tuesday was the same thing. Complete radio silence. No phone calls, no text messages, no attempt at communication whatsoever. By Wednesday, I realized that he really meant it when he said our marriage was over and that he wanted nothing more to do with me. That's when I decided I couldn't just sit there passively and let Blake control the entire narrative of what had happened between us. Blake had always been extremely good at making himself look like the reasonable, mature person in any conflict we'd ever had during our relationship. I knew that if I didn't get my side of the story out there first, everyone would just automatically assume that I was the villain in this situation without hearing my perspective. The topic of marriage wasn't even really a major discussion between us. It just felt inevitable, like the natural progression of what we were building together. We were already living together successfully, splitting every expense equally and planning out this whole future as a team. In many ways, it seemed like we were already functioning as a married couple in everything but the legal paperwork. The partnership was working beautifully, and formalizing it felt like the obvious next step. So I crafted what I thought was a carefully worded Facebook post about how healthy marriages require open communication and trust between partners, and how some people use private conversations as weapons when they don't get their way in an argument. I didn't mention Blake by name anywhere in the post, but I made it pretty clear that my husband had violated my privacy and kicked me out of our home for expressing totally normal concerns about financial planning and protecting my assets. I talked about how controlling behavior often starts small, with partners monitoring conversations and isolating you from family members who are trying to support you. I even mentioned how Blake had forced my mother to leave his house just for supporting me during what should have been a private, difficult conversation between a mother and daughter. I was trying to paint a picture of a man who couldn't handle his successful wife having normal anxieties about marriage and money. The post got a tremendous amount of supportive comments from friends who knew both of us. People were saying they couldn't believe Blake would treat me that way, that I deserved so much better than someone who couldn't handle his wife making more money than him and being concerned about protecting her financial future. For about 6 hours, I felt like maybe I was actually winning this public relations battle. My narrative was out there for everyone to see. People were rallying around me and offering their support, and Blake was starting to look like an unreasonable asshole who couldn't handle his wife's success and independence. I started thinking that maybe the public pressure would force him to come to his senses, and we could work things out like rational adults who just had a bad fight. Then I got the notification that Blake had tagged me in a post of his own. I clicked on it and literally felt the blood drain from my face as I realized what I was looking at. It was an audio file, about 4 minutes long, with a caption that simply said, "Since we're sharing relationship details publicly now, here's the conversation my wife is referring to. You can judge for yourselves who's being unreasonable here." My hands were physically shaking as I pressed play on that audio file, and hearing my own voice saying all those horrible things about Blake being comfortable living off my salary, about regretting not getting a prenup, and about feeling trapped by my own success in our marriage. It was absolutely devastating to hear played back like that. But the worst part wasn't even what I had said during that conversation with my mother. The most violating part was realizing that Blake had been standing outside our house, secretly recording me without my knowledge while I was having what I thought was a completely private conversation with my mother. I was working through some difficult feelings with someone I trusted, and my husband was lurking outside documenting everything for future use against me. The violation of that secret recording felt almost worse than the divorce itself. It made me feel like Blake had been planning this whole thing, just waiting for me to slip up or say something he could use to destroy me. The man I'd married and trusted had been conducting surveillance on me in my own home. The comments on Blake's post started pouring in immediately, and they were absolutely brutal and devastating to read. People I'd known for years were calling me ungrateful, materialistic, and a gold digger who didn't deserve such a supportive husband. Someone shared Blake's post to one of those popular relationship drama pages on Facebook, and within hours, it had thousands of shares and comments from complete strangers who were dissecting my character and motivations. The narrative I had tried so hard to control was completely destroyed in a matter of hours. Everything I'd said in my original post now looked like manipulative lies because people could hear my actual words about calculating divorce scenarios and worrying about having to pay alimony to Blake. I proposed about 2 years ago, and I kept it simple and personal rather than going for some elaborate, over-the-top gesture. I took her to this steakhouse she absolutely loved, the kind of place where we'd celebrated other milestones in our relationship. I had the ring I'd been saving up for tucked away in my jacket pocket, and when the moment felt right, I started my little speech. She actually said yes before I could even finish asking the question, which made me feel like we were completely on the same page about our future. We immediately started planning a small, intimate wedding because neither of us wanted to blow our carefully managed savings on just one day, no matter how special it was. I tried desperately to delete my original Facebook post, but it was already too late. Screenshots of both posts were everywhere across social media platforms. People were calling me out specifically for trying to manipulate the story and control the narrative when the actual truth was right there in audio form for everyone to hear. My attempt to get ahead of the story had completely backfired and made me look even worse. My workplace started getting phone calls about the situation because some internet detective had figured out where I worked and shared my LinkedIn profile in the comments section of Blake's viral post. I had to sit through this absolutely humiliating meeting with human resources about how my personal drama was potentially reflecting poorly on the company's reputation and professional image. They didn't fire me, but the message was clear that I needed to keep my personal life from affecting my professional responsibilities. The divorce proceedings were somehow even more humiliating than the social media nightmare had been. Blake showed up to every meeting and court appearance with this attitude of dignified disappointment, like he was sadly doing what needed to be done for his own self-respect and emotional well-being. His lawyer kept talking about how Blake just wanted to move forward with his life with his dignity intact, and wasn't interested in dragging things out or making the process more difficult than it needed to be. When it came time to discuss the division of our assets and financial arrangements, Blake completely waived his right to any alimony payments. He said he only wanted his personal belongings and to keep living in his parents' house, which had never really been mine anyway since it belonged to his family. His lawyer made this big, dramatic speech about how Blake believed in earning his own way in life and wouldn't take a single penny of money that he hadn't earned himself through his own hard work. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there looking like the greedy, calculating witch who had been worried about paying spousal support to a guy who didn't even want it. The contrast couldn't have been more stark or damaging to my reputation. Blake looked noble and principled, standing on his moral high ground, while I looked like a materialistic gold digger who had been planning to financially exploit a good man. The local Miami newspaper actually picked up our story because apparently it's unusual for the higher-earning spouse to be the one asking for the divorce, and even more unusual for the lower-earning spouse to completely refuse alimony payments. The headline was something like, "Local man refuses wife's money in divorce, becomes symbol of self-respect and dignity." I wanted to crawl into a hole and disappear when I saw that article. Blake became this folk hero overnight, the guy who stood up to his greedy, materialistic wife and walked away with his dignity completely intact. People were sharing articles about him on social media, calling him an inspiration and a real man who couldn't be bought or corrupted by money. Meanwhile, I was being portrayed as this materialistic harpy who had married a good man and then tried to financially abuse him when he didn't live up to my gold digger expectations. The comments on every single article written about our divorce were just absolutely brutal to read. People were saying I got exactly what I deserved, that Blake had dodged a bullet by finding out my true nature before it was too late, and that I was a perfect example of what's wrong with modern women who only care about money and material success. My dating life since the divorce has been an absolute nightmare that I never could have imagined. Every time I match with someone who seems decent on the dating apps, they either eventually recognize me from the viral story that's still floating around the internet, or someone else fills them in about my reputation and what happened with Blake. I've had guys literally ask me on first dates if I'm the woman who called her husband a gold digger, and the way they ask makes it clear they've already made up their minds about what kind of person I am. When I try to explain that the situation is way more complicated than the headlines made it seem, that I was just working through some fears privately with my mother, and didn't mean for any of it to become public, they just nod politely and change the subject. Then they never call again after that conversation. All the good, decent men disappear completely once they learn about my past, leaving me with only guys who either think I'm damaged goods or who are only interested because they think I'll pay for everything since I make good money.